Cheers, Canadian wine lovers. It is Wine Wednesday. Thank you for stopping by. Today is the Mira Show, aka Carl's on a Cruise edition of Wine Wednesday. And I thought, you normally listen to Carl, right? And Carl has been tasting wine and professionally working with wine for over 25 years. And it's pretty cool and interesting to hear him talk about wine because you learn a lot. And then here I am. I'm a little bit more like the average wine enthusiast. And I thought it might be helpful and fun to share a little bit about what I've learned the last 2 years since I started tasting wine as a hobby during the pandemic, alongside someone who's been so experienced tasting the world's best wines. So that's what our show today is about. So stop by. This is a chance to unwind, take some time for yourself, learn a thing or two about wine, or if you already know a lot about wine, let me help you go back to that first time you fell in love with wine. And if you can, share that with us too. Tell us a little bit more about why you got into wine in the first place. So for me, it was pretty simple. It was the pandemic. The first time in our marriage, my husband and I are sitting at home all day. And I'm like, so what's all these wine bottles you have open? I don't really know what you do. I just know you taste a lot of wine. And he goes and starts telling me about the wines. As you guys know, we eventually started Carl's Wine Club, and here we are today, 2.5 years later. But one of the things that I realized right off the bat is the reason I never knew what Carl really does, even though it's so much fun, is because wine is a bit intimidating. I don't know who else has ever experienced that. As a novice, you look at people who drink wine and they go to their glass and they're like, oh yes, a little bit oaky. I wonder if it was 18 months or 36 months on oak. And they've got, wine lovers. I'm now one. We're a little bit nerdy. We have our own terminology. We have our own, things we talk about. And it can be a little bit intimidating. So I want to share a little bit about what I learned about how to take away that intimidation. And so I want to talk about my Mira Scale and why I do that for rating wines. I want to talk a little bit about one of the first wines I ever fell in love with. And if you're listening, I would love if you could put in the comments a little bit about the first time you fell in love with wine, because it's always fascinating. It usually becomes a lifelong kind of passion hobby for people once you have that aha moment with a wine. And then I want to talk about that wine, that one of the first wines that I did fall in love with, the Maverick Bush Vine Syrah. What makes it special, why it made it into our top 10 wines of 2022 after we tasted well over 1,000 Canadian wines last year. And if you stay till the end, I also have a message from the man himself, Carl Boucher, who is on a cruise this week working. He's working, but he is on a cruise in the Caribbean. So he took a few minutes to send us a message, and I'll play that for you guys in a few. So let's get started. If you're stopping by, tell me where you're tuning in from and what's in your glass. And we'll get started with my take as an average wine enthusiast who started drinking wine in the pandemic. So first things first, because I'm married to such a wine nerd as Carl, I have maybe opened 5 bottles of wine myself in my life. One of the tricks I learned, though, is if you want to be unromantic about it, because there's a romantic way to open a bottle and an unromantic. One of our members taught me this trip. He said you can actually, a lot of people, they take this off your corkscrew, the little knife, right? And they cut around the foil, and then they peel the foil off and get to the cork. But if you want to be unromantic about it, which sometimes, on a Friday night, on a Wednesday night, you want to get, relaxing, you can actually just pull this right off. Not very romantic, but the efficiency nerd in me is like, yes, that's great. You just pull it right off. And then I've always been terrified to break the cork when I do this, but I have learned wine. You just have to kind of buckle up and try it. And so here I am opening this bottle of wine. See, I go on that first step. seriously, like my 5th bottle that I've opened myself, because I have full service from my husband opening these bottles every night for us. But here we go. I did it. So there we go. I'm opening the 2020 Bush Vine Syrah from Maverick, which the 2019 was our number 1 wine, or number 8 wine in the top 10 wines of 2022. So tell us what's in your glass. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. And we're going to be chatting about that first time you fell in love with wine and my take on a few things related to wine as someone who seriously started drinking wine during the pandemic. How could I, Caitlin says, just pull off the foil like that? I know it's kind of unromantic, but you know, my first point here is that I think wine can be intimidating, but it's not when you realize that wine is inherently personal and it's about you and it's about your experience, your taste buds, your preferences. And it's a way to like discover yourself, I think. As you taste each wine, I find I learn something new about my perceptions. And it's always fun. And I think one of the biggest benefits of wine is when you do that socially and you're learning about your friends' perceptions and you talk about it and you put words to your sensory experience. And I think that's one of the healthiest things you can do on many levels. Yes. So Sandra's saying first time she fell in love with wine. It was when her son lived in Ontario and visiting him in London, Ontario. He took us wine touring. It's all his fault. Perfect story. I love that. I know once you're at a winery and you're visiting and there's the vineyards, like how can you not fall in love with wine, right? And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about too, is how I fell in love with this wine, because it's a lot to do with your environment and the mood you're in and the way the wine is showing in that particular moment. It can be magical. It can be amazing. Yes. So wine can be intimidating, I was saying. And one of the ways I've gotten over that is to realize, you know what? I'm going to give wine my own scaling system. Carl has an amazing system on a 100-point scale where he talks about, the difference between a 94-point wine and a 93-point wine. I'm a little less scientific, perhaps like many of you. Tell me if this is. But my first rating system is on the Mira Scale is, do I like the wine or not? So let's see. I'm going to take a sip of this Bush Vine Syrah from Maverick, and I am going to tell you if I like it or not. I already kind of know because I tasted this wine a few months ago, but thank you. One of our VIPs is saying, so true. We've made wine too confusing and unapproachable. And if you like it, it's good wine, period. And freak, I love this. So this is why I love wine, because you can have a long day. It's a hard day. And then you can sit down with friends, chat like we are right now, have a few sips of wine, and it helps you get back. It's like a trigger for your joy. It's like a trigger saying, okay, now it's time to switch off the cares of the day and let's just relax. And I love this. This wine has length, which is something I didn't really realize what it's about until Carl started training me. So we'd be tasting wines together at the start of the pandemic. And I got to tell you a confession, okay? When I first started tasting wines, they kind of all tasted the same. I honestly was like, I don't know. We tasted 3 or 4 together. I could tell they're different, but to me, it was like, okay, they're all red wine. I don't know. But then Carl would be like, well, notice now, just focus on the finish, how long it lasts in your mouth at the end of your sip, right? And once you do that, you're like, there is a big difference in the finish of each wine, right? And it is more enjoyable, I think, when it has a longer finish, especially like a red wine where you're just sitting and chatting. And then sometimes he'd point out a wine and be like, okay, focus on the mid palate, the space in between the first part of your sip and the last part. One sec here, the phone's ringing. And sometimes that's complex at the mid palate. And you're like, oh yeah, your mouth is doing all these aerobics. And other times there's a gap there. And that's where he's like, okay, that's where I want to see a little more there. And that wine is not going to get rated so highly because it's not, taking you on a on a journey. So yeah, Ken says, when I was in Calgary, I used to grade how many glasses I would like. And I still do that, Ken. I still do all the time. So like this wine right now, but for me, this is why I believe wine is so subjective and personal. And my scale is like nothing that you can base your your enjoyment off of, because it's all circumstantial to me too. So right now I'm chatting with you guys. I'm having a great time. I could probably drink this whole bottle if I wanted. So on the Mira scale, this is like a one bottle kind of wine. But that's the Mira scale. To me, it's just, do I like it or not? And if I like it, how much of it do I want? Do I want a few glasses with friends? Is this more of a buy by the case kind of wine? Is this a wine that's like, oh, it's okay, I don't mind a glass or two, right? And very rarely, because we're so spoiled at Carl's Wine Club, we get so many of the best wines sent our way. Very rarely I'm like, yeah, that's not a wine that I want even a glass of, and I won't even cook with it. But that's super rare, I'm finding, because we get kind of the best wine sent our way. So we're really spoiled that way. But yeah, that's how I take the intimidation out of wine. It's just reminding myself all the time that, you know what, it's so subjective. And the other piece of it is just practicing, like with any other hobby, if you keep tasting wines, especially I get a lot out of tasting wines side by side with each other. That's how I learn a lot about my preferences. And that's how I take the whole intimidation out of it. I say, you know what? I have my own rating scale. Do I like it or not? Yes or no? And if I like it, how many glasses would I like, or bottles? So yeah, that's my take on these things. Now, what's it like to fall in love with wine or a wine? So this Bush Vine Syrah from Maverick was one of the first wines I had an aha moment with, and it was last year in January. So at that point, I'd been drinking wine with Carl, tasting wine regularly for about a year and a half. And there had been a few wines for sure. I remember tasting the 2006 Black Hills Nota Bene once. And that was a wow wine. I fell in love with that wine because it was so complex and so interesting. And it just left an imprint on my sensory perceptions, right? But this wine, okay, here was the mood. Long day, and we were having a steak. So I'm excited about that. I eat some steak. I have a few sips of this Syrah, and I'm like, wow, it was just the perfect moment. And the pairing was amazing too. So all the spice came out of this wine with that steak. And then the next piece that made me fall in love with this wine was that we looked up the price, and it was like $29.95 plus tax. And it still is, by the way, for the new 2020 version. So that's what made me fall in love with it. Now, we featured it last January, and it sold out pretty quick, because after we featured it, it was also featured by Wine Align, and it won platinum in its category across Canada. So that 2019 Bush Vine Syrah from Maverick sold out in a flash after those two things happened. But they still have the 2020 available. And we reviewed that. Carl gave it, I think, not 94 points, but maybe 93 or 93 plus. I'll have to double check that. And I'm going to send an email your way, guys, later with those notes as well. But that wine is still available. So a little bit about Maverick, a little bit about Bush Vine Syrah. Since I learned about it, I love to share about that. Maverick was started back in 2009, I believe, by a couple. And it was sold to Andrew Windsor, a winemaker who was a winemaker over at Tin Horn Creek. And I believe his business partner is Jan Nelson. And so this is Andrew here. And he was 6 kilometers up the road at Tin Horn Creek Vineyards, very well established Okanagan winery. And they bought this winery, Maverick, just down the road. And this is the Bush Vine Syrah. That's what it looks like when you have a Bush Vine Syrah. And I was like, yeah, what does this mean, Bush Vine? And what it means is that they kind of let it grow a little bit wild like this. It's one of the oldest viticulture techniques, apparently. And what that does to the vines is that it allows them to grow even deeper roots. So what I've learned is when the vines get deeper roots. They're searching for water. So the more they struggle like that, the more the grapes are going to be more concentrated, less yield, but more concentrated. So it's, I think, great results for Maverick. A lot of people don't do this anymore because it's expensive. You can't have machines tending to those vines. You have to have people who know what they're doing do that, and that gets expensive. But if you do it well, like I believe Maverick does, the Bush Vine Syrah is quite exceptional. And I think for that price point, $30 plus tax, that's why it made it into our top 10 wines of 2022 at number 8, because price to value that you get out of it is pretty outstanding. So there you have it. That's my take on how to take the intimidation out of wine. A little bit about how I fell in love with this wine, one of the first wines I fell in love with, and a little bit about Maverick. So now I just want to see what Ken was saying here. We used to go to BC a lot in the early 90s, learned a lot of wines and got to love the area. It's just an amazing area. And yes, I agree. Salami and black olive tapenade in a glass for the 2020 Bush Vine Syrah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Amazing what you can get out of a wine when you're just sniffing it and tasting it. Yeah, so let's hear what Carl has to say about the 2019 and 2020 Bush Vine Syrah from Maverick and just his message. Let's see what his view looks like out in the Caribbean.
Out of the Okanagan, where I would...
Let's start you again, Carl.
Canadian wine lovers. Hey, all the Carl's Wine Club members. How is it going, guys? Mira's taking over. Mira's like completely rocking it here in Canada. Chatting about our South Okanagan wines. Chatting about Maverick. I am completely halfway around the world. Behind me, it's Harvest Key. One of the private islands owned by NCL was the Norwegian cruise line. So we have docked there for the day. For people who doesn't know, I am out on a consulting trip, working for a company out of Calgary. They do executive corporate meetings and travel. So I'm here, and I wanted to just to connect and chat with you guys. I know that Mira wanted to talk about Maverick Estate, Oliver, BC, the Canadian wine capital in Oliver. So south of the Okanagan, where I would say some of the top wines in our country are made. So I remember that Mira had a ha moment when it's probably one of the first time that I ever seen her in our wine career together really like have a moment where it was one of our favorite wine, like everything unfold right in front of my eyes. I knew that this wine really hit a chord, and it was the 2019 Bush Vine Syrah by Maverick. And so we're tasting the Maverick lineup then, and I know that she likes Syrah, but like this one was something special for her. So after that, she tasted it the first, so I tasted it right after, and it's like, what? Oh my god, it was incredible. So, and the price point was something that we always dreamed about with Maverick, because they were one of the only one in the south of the Okanagan who produced a top premium Syrah at a price under $30. So it became right away one of our favorite. But the biggest problem is they had a very small amount. So the 2019, the one that we extremely loved, went out so quick. And the thing is, we had our feature, Carl's Wine Club feature, right early in January, and we, like, our members went crazy because we gave them a 94 points. And right out of the gate, it was one of the Carl's Wine Club top 10 wine candidate. And I and he did, at the end of the day, after another 1,200 Canadian wine tasted, it was still part of our top 10 wine of the year. So what we, and I was also, this summer when I built my top BC Syrah list, I wanted to put that 2019 Bush Vine Syrah, but quickly the winery said, Carl, what are you talking about? Come on, we're sold out. You guys absolutely like wiped us out of our best wine right out of the gate this year. But I would like you to taste the 2020. We think in our book that it's better. So I'm like, oh, okay. So anyway, we tasted the 2020, and by the matter of fact, it was maybe not better, but the 2020 was right up there with the 2019. I'm personally a big fan of the 2019 vintage for a couple of reasons. First, because there's more elegance. There is more complex, but maybe not more complexity, but the 19 had a freshness, a complexity, and a elegance that I thought it was like really freaking out there class, world class. 2020, I gave it a 93 points, just maybe like one little notch under, but many of my peers scored the 2020 higher than the 2019. So and in that part, like in terms of structure, quality, body, this is exactly the same style. So I would say that the 2020 has a little bit more of the boldness of the vintage instead of the intricacy and complexity and elegance of the 19. So it's slightly a different style of wine, but completely the same style. We know it's from the same mold. So that's one part. They also made great rich Chardonnay, fantastic Sauvignon Blanc. I like their Pinot Gris too. That for the first time around we had one of the Pinot Gris, but so talking Maverick this week. So I hope that I think that Mira has decided to send the link to every one of you across the country. So we're gonna revive the Maverick, the Maverick wine for this week, and you have the chance to stock up on the 2020 Bush Vine Syrah. This wine's gonna be gone, but then you're also gonna have the chance to have the Renegade, who is one of my favorite value wine from the south of the Okanagan. I always said, if you throw some Syrah in my Bordeaux blend, it makes me pretty happy. And this is something really good. A $25 wine, you absolutely deliver like a $40 wine. The Renegade from Maverick, classic South Okanagan. I love that. So here I am from Arvis Key here, Arvis Key private island down in the Caribbean. So I'm gonna pass that back to Mira and get you Maverick wine right away, because some of them are gonna be out of stock pretty quick. So Canadian wine lovers, Carl's Wine Club members from halfway around the world, I want to say goodbye to you and enjoy the show with Mira. This is the Mira show today.
You know what? At the end there, he talked about the Renegade. And you know what? I had that last night with a member in Summerland, BC here, the Renegade. It was, what did she call it? It was like that actor from Goldfinger, you know, driving a sexy car. Like that's the kind of wine it is, very suave. But I think Carl was actually thinking, when he said amazing value wine, he was thinking of the Rubius, because the Renegade is around 35, I believe. But Rubius is another wine from Maverick, around 25, and exceptional value. So there you have it. A little bit about Maverick, a little bit about hopefully taking you back, thinking about what is it that made you fall in love with wine. And then especially too, why do you support Canadian wine? Because we've launched the Canadian Wine Challenge. We want to get thousands of Canadian wine lovers across the country interested in Canadian wine and supporting it, because I believe what we are doing here is truly world-class in very small quantities. So that's the thing. When you find a wine that you're interested in or a wine that you like, Canadian wine is one of those that you should snap up, because it won't last long. So I learned that the hard way with the 2019 that I loved of this Bush Vine Syrah. It sold out so fast. We have a little bit left of the 2020. So if you're curious to try it, now is a good time. I'm going to send emails starting tonight to our VIP members and to our Carl's Wine Club members. If you're not on that list, join us. It's free at carlswineclub.com. Hope you guys have an amazing night. Happy Wine Wednesday. Cheers. And we'll chat soon.